In October of 1998, the first set in the block that almost broke Magic was released. Consisting of 350 cards, the block follows the exploits of the iconic planeswalker Urza and begins with Urza's Saga, a prequel to the events of the Weatherlight Saga from the previous 4 sets, as well as both an expanded part of and sequel to 1994's Antiquities. The set, and the block as a whole, carries a lot of story, introduces to the game some of its most iconic characters and locations, and expands upon many that were alluded to in some of Magic's earliest sets. Taking a departure from how the story was presented in previous sets, each of the set's 5 colors tell a different part of the story, with green showcasing the conflict on Argoth and how those events would eventually lead towards Dominaria's Ice Age. Black cards showcase Urza's attempt to personally attack Phyrexia. White is centered on Urza's time in Saras' realm after nearly dying in said attack. Blue explains Urza's founding of the Tellurian Academy and the temporal and bloodline experiments that went on there. And red was centered on the foundation of the Tellurian Shiv Alliance. For more than just the surface-level overview of Urza's Saga's story, we recommend you read the books The Brothers' War, Planeswalker, and Time Stream. That sated, here's the abridged version. Harbin, the son of Urza and his wife Kyla Ben Krug, was flying in an ornithopter when crosswinds blew him horribly off course, crash landing on the island of Argoth. An elf helps Arbin repair the aircraft with some wood from the area's mighty forest and sends him on his way. Returning home, he tells Urza about the forest and the massive amounts of lumber he could find there. An exploration party lands on the island, and the sentient forest responds with hostility. Yoshin invaders rolled through on mobile forts, pillaging the land for materials that can be used to help in the war against Urza's brother, Mishra. Despite help from the mystical forces Gaia and Titania, the forest and its inhabitants were unable to repel them as they stripped the land of anything that they could use. Ultimately, Argoth proved a lost cause, and the land was all but exhausted of its resources, turning it into a blasted landscape. A good while into the Brothers' War, Gix, a former Thran who was transfigured into a phyrexian praetor by the game's ultimate bad guy at the time, Yawgmoth, entered Argoth through a transplanar portal. He took note of the conflict between Urza and Mishra and decided that regardless of who lost, he would slay the victor. On the morning of what would become the final battle, Gix used his powers to make the machines on both sides of the war go haywire. Finally, Urza and Mishra faced off mano a mano. Mishra took out his Ankh and attempted to slash his brother's neck out of sheer rage. In response, Urza blasted Mishra with a fireball. Mishra's flesh melted away and exposed an artificial endoskeleton beneath where flesh and guts should instead be. Mishra, long since deceased and recreated in phyrexian form, was no longer the flesh and blood brother Urza remembered. Urza then used the Golgothian Silex, causing a plane-altering explosion, incidentally igniting his Planeswalker Spark with his Might Stone and Mishra's Weak Stone, forming the newly minted Planeswalker's Eyes. The rest of the set, and indeed a number of those thereafter, then follow the events after this point into what will soon become the Phyrexian invasion of Dominaria. Meanwhile, back on Phyrexia, the Phyrexians were setting in motion the next steps in their effort to invade and overtake Dominaria. They were busy at work, reprocessing bodies and turning them into Phyrexian-controlled, human-appearing agents. These sleeper agents were placed strategically to observe, sabotage, and report back to Phyrexia. One such agent, Xantcha, resisted and developed a sense of self. As punishment, her Heartstone was removed and stored in the Phyrexian Tower. As these sleeper agents were becoming found out and destroyed on Dominaria, they began to be assigned elsewhere so that they may look for artifacts and bring them back to Phyrexia. Out of hatred for her race, Xantcha would often sabotage her own missions. The Phyrexians caught on and victimized her. Urza just happened to be nearby and saved her. In exchange, she told the planeswalker how to get to Phyrexia. Urza equipped his armor and decided to take the entire plane essentially on his own, with nothing more than a dragon engine and Xantcha in tow. Unfortunately, the planeswalker far underestimated what he would encounter on the machine plane. He was able to fight his way through the first 3 spheres on the plane, facing increasing resistance each time. On the 4th sphere, however, things didn't go quite as well. Xantcha used her silver tongue to lie her way into the Phyrexian tower that contained her heart, stealing back her heartstone and fleeing. Outside of the tower, she finds Urza in dire straits. Facing certain Phyrexian corruption and his likely demise, Urza planeswalked away to destinations unknown. With Urza badly wounded and on the run, pursued by Phyrexian negators from plane to plane, he finally found a safe place to hide and recover once arriving at Saras' sanctum. An artificial plane, a pure white mana, the sanctum was created by none other than the ancient planeswalker, Saga. She takes in the sick and Urza, who takes a half-decade to recover from his failed attack on Phyrexia. Xantcha too receives medical attention and is allowed time to recover. Unfortunately, the long-term introduction of black mana to Saras' pure white plane caused undue pain to the planeswalker, causing her to flee the plane of her own creation, leaving her protector, Radiant, in charge in her stead. Shortly thereafter, the Phyrexians located the plane and began invading. Angels were expunged one after another, and black mana began to contaminate the plane. Phyrexian forces persecuted any angel they could not kill, including Selenia, an angel who would play a key role in the Weatherlight Saga. While this was happening, Urza did absolutely nothing to defend the very same angels who nursed he and his sleeper agent friend back to good health. Sarah then returns from her impromptu vacation, only to find her sanctum in ruins, and all but a key few of her angels either slain or imprisoned. Xantcha, as a sign of trust, presented Urza with her heart before the two fled the falling plane. Back on Dominaria, Urza dwelled on his past failures for centuries until Xantcha finally snaps him out of his funk and pointed out that the sleeper agent threat was still very real on the plane. During the two's efforts to snuff out any and all sleeper agents, they were unnerved to discover Gix still out on the plane. During Dominaria's null moon, and with sleeper agents dying left and right from Urza's sabotage, Gix appears and is attacked by Urza. The fight brings the two back to the Caves of the Damned, better known by players as Caves of Kolios, and Gix gains the upper hand as he begins to extract Urza's Power Stone eyes. Xantcha interferes, distracting Gix as Urza's eyes cause an explosion that killed not only the Praetor, but Xantcha as well. With little time to grieve the loss of his longtime friend due to the ever-present Phyrexian threat, Urza relocates to the Isle of Tolaria and begins to build what would become the Tellurian Academy. It's at this academy where a number of artificers and mages would be trained, including a number who would become critical to Magic's storyline, such as one disruptive student named Teferi. Running the academy alongside Urza was Baron, a master wizard, and the only other person who knew the true reason for the academy's existence: preparation for the inevitable Phyrexian invasion. As protection towards those ends and to prevent sleeper agents from arriving at the school, no adults, save for those handpicked by Urza and Baron to act as the school's administration and faculty, were allowed. While at the academy, Urza repeatedly performed time experiments in hopes to travel back in time to when the Thran still existed on Dominaria and stop the Phyrexian threat before it ever even began. After numerous failed attempts, he discovered that silver can travel backwards in time without any ill effects. This stroke of genius prompted him to construct a silver golem that would become known as Karn, which is the Thran word for mighty. He then provided Karn not only with a brand on his chest to signify his role, but also the heart of his departed companion Xantcha. Despite exhaustive efforts in Urza's arcane laboratory in researching time travel by using the lab's temporal aperture, Urza was only able to send Karn back in time 2 days, nowhere close to the thousands of years necessary to venture back in time to the time of the Thran Empire. And while there's much more to the story, that's about as far as the set Urza's Saga goes with it. But that is not the end of Urza's Saga story as a set, as there is much more to tell.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Designed and developed by the likes of Mike Elliott, Richard Garfield, Mark Rosewater, and others, Urza's Saga, and indeed the entire Urza's block as a whole, had a storyline and thematic feel that suggests that it's a set that cares about artifacts. Surprisingly, that isn't the case, as the folks behind it were actually creating an Enchantment Matters set. In fact, the decision to make the storyline of the set to be about Urza wasn't made until set design had passed the point of no return on the direction that they were going. Unable to shift gears so late in the process, the set's Enchantment Matter theme was buried beneath Urza-focused storylines, as well as Artifice-inspired set symbols, and a story arc branded as, quote, the Artifact Cycle. But still, enchantments actually play a big role in the set, as Mark Rosewater explains in his Drive to Work podcast.
Enchantments play a big role. In fact, for those that remember Urza Saga Limited, the enchantments, you actually played enchantment removal main deck in Urza Saga Limited, because there was a lot of enchantments that were super scary, including a common pestilence, which was a wonderful idea. Anyway, but what happened was, at the time, we were doing the Weatherlight Saga, but the team, Mike and I, who had originally come up with the story, were kind of forced off the team. And the team that was there decided that they were going to spend a year going back in time and see Urza, what Urza was up to, and explain Urza's connection to the Weatherlight Saga.
In the end, Wizards of the Coast decided that was ultimately fine, because they were going to focus more on story rather than mechanics.
Get out of town. I didn't know you did anything creative.
The end result, however, was arguably the most broken set the company has ever made.
So we happened to make a whole bunch of broken things, some of which were artifacts. So we had a set revolving around Urza. In fact, all 3 sets were named after Urza, a famous artificer, in a block in which we had a lot of broken artifacts that was labeled the Artifact Cycle. And by the way, talking about broken artifacts, we banned a whole bunch of cards that block. 0 of the cards we banned were enchantments. We in fact banned every other card type but enchantments. So we had a broken block in which none of the broken things were enchantments, called the Artifact Cycle, starring an artificer with broken artifacts. Surprise, surprise, no one got that it was an enchantment block.
And just how broken was the block? Considering that players even today consider Urza's Saga, along with the rest of the Urza block, to be amongst Magic's strongest ever, it's safe to say that the power level was probably a tad high, especially in 1998.
Guess you guys aren't ready for that yet.
So, what made it broken? Well, for starters, the set, which won the 1998 Origins Award for Best Card Game Expansion or Supplement, had 9 of the block's 16 cards that, at one point or another, were banned from DCI-sanctioned formats. Stroke of Genius, Time Spiral, Windfall, Yawgmoth's Will, Goblin Lackey, Voltaic Key, Gaia's Cradle, Saras Sanctum, and Tellurian Academy. Of those, 3 of them are still banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage play. Urza Saga also has an expansive list of other cards of note that, thankfully, never found their way onto the dreaded banned and restricted lists. This includes rares such as Gilded Drake, Morphling, Exploration, Back to Basics, Lifeline, and Gamble, as well as Sneak Attack and Show and Tell, 2 key components in a popular and powerful Legacy deck simply known as Sneak and Show. The common and uncommon slots weren't lacking in powerful or notable cards either, with the likes of Carpet of Flowers, Turnabout, Priest of Titania, Abundance, Reign of Filth, and Exhume. The set was also the first to introduce Magic's first widely available foil cards. At the time marketed as, quote, premium cards, those who attended the Urza Saga pre-release were treated to a shiny, date-stamped Lightning Dragon promotional card. 10 other cards, Skittering Scourge, Rewind, Pouncing Jaguar, Duress, Karn Silver Golem, and all 5 basic lands from the set would also later receive the foil treatment and were provided as prize support for Magic's now defunct Arena League in 1999 and early 2000. Urza Saga also set the stage for a new era of combo decks once the rest of the block hit the market. It's an era referred to in hindsight as Magic's Combo Winter by players and Wizards of the Coast staff alike, thanks to decks like Tommy Javi's 1998-99 Pro Tour winning deck that exploited card interactions from across the block, ultimately using a combination of mana-producing artifacts as well as the Exodus enchantment Mind Over Matter to continually untap his Tellurian Academy until he can cast a large enough stroke of genius on his opponents, decking them in one fell swoop. And it's an era that would only prove even more formidable once the block's next set released the following February. But we will leave the legacy of the second entry into the Urza's block for another time.
Why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?
Is Urza Saga one of your favorite Magic the Gathering sets? If so, let us know in the comment section below. And remember to subscribe to Magic Untapped on YouTube and support us on Patreon for more great Magic the Gathering content.